Creek, winner of nine, been the winner of 9 Emmys. It's the most awarded comedy series in a single year. And not only that, but the show went on to sweep an astonishing 4 acting categories, receiving the most wins for a comedy series in its final season. Our guest and his iconic father, Eugene Levy, were also the first father and son pair to win Emmys in the same year. Pretty cool. We are ecstatic to welcome to the stage Emmy and SAG winner, writer, actor, director, and producer, the extraordinary Dan Levy.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Can you hear me? Oh, great. So many masked faces. It looks so nice. Never been so excited to see more masks in my whole life.
Well, Dan, welcome to Bold, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we have all of these wonderful people that are joining us here live. We are also streaming to our customers around the world and to our employees around the world. So this is a big deal for us.
No
we really
pressure.
appreciate your being. Well, we are excited, and I definitely want to jump in and talk about this small cultural phenomenon that you started called Schitt's Creek.
I would happily discuss.
Yes, excellent. Well, that's why we have you here. Let's dive in. Well, I shared with you backstage that I first came to know Schitt's Creek because my wife was watching it in your first season on the Pop Network, which I've never even heard of before.
I hadn't either.
Yeah? And now everybody knows about it. I think
it's a funny thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We found the network. I think it was formerly the TV Guide Network. That's the network where you used to go to see what was on television. It would just like scroll for 24 hours. Not what most people would opt for as a venue for their television shows. But it was the best we got, and they were enthusiastic, and we were in standard definition when everyone else was in, high def. But it's
it got you going though.
You hustle, and that's part of it.
That's a good place to start, I think. So tell us how you came up with the idea.
Oh goodness. I think now that I've had the time to really think about it, it's really kind of a connect the dots kind of situation. I was working at MTV as a VJ for many, many years before I left to do other things. And one of the things that I was working on when I was at MTV was this show called The Hills. And many of you are just not admitting that you've watched it. But we would do these kind of color commentary shows on The Hills every week, and it turned into a bit of a thing. And when I left MTV, I was questing for something that was a little more intellectually stimulating. Very grateful for the opportunity and the experience. And they were all lovely. The show was really lovely, but it was one of those things where I felt like I had come to the end of a chapter in my life that was both fulfilling, exciting. It was cool to be an MTV VJ in your 20s. It got you into like cool bars and stuff. But I was ready for more. And I think one of the things that I now thinking back was connecting the dots to was this idea of having explored from a sociological standpoint the concept of wealth. And whether I knew it at the time, what we were discussing through these little after shows that we would do for The Hills was an analysis of how wealth affects people and ultimately how you should navigate your way through it. As a viewer, we were kind of in the after show format. You talk about, should we be doing what they do or should we be doing something slightly different? And in that exploration, I was realizing that I was really kind of laying the foundation for what would become this show, which was in a story of wealthy people who ultimately realized that life had much more to offer than just money. So I now can kind of piece it back together. At the time, I thought I had come up with this really ingenious idea completely on my own, but it was really kind of fed through my previous experiences. And I brought the idea to my dad, who I had never gone to for anything out of like an extreme fear of the intense judgment that comes on children of people who happen to have parents who have made it in the same profession. The nepotism thing is like a really intense label that people love to just slap blindly on you. But I knew that I had something to offer in this capacity. Like I knew that I wasn't coming to him and relying on him in any capacity. I was coming to him with an idea and saying, I love what you've done. I love all the movies that he co-wrote with Christopher Guest. I loved that sensibility that he brought to everything. There's a warmth and a love that I think my dad kind of inherently has in his comedy, and I wanted that for this idea. And we sat down and we started to brainstorm what this concept could really be, and it really unfolded quite easily. And we really got the hook for the idea in researching how, you know, people have lost tremendous amounts of money. And one of the articles that we stumbled across was someone who had bought a town that they thought they would turn into like a location for film and television, and then it never really worked out and kind of went bust. And we thought, well, what if this family bought this town as a joke because the name was Schitt's Creek and it was a whole, and everything kind of clicked into place at that point. And the rest was really history. I mean, it wasn't. It was like a tremendous amount of work and 6 hard years of stress and anxiety and love and care. But it really has felt like it went from an idea to finding a home that was really, you know, what we had thought at the time was our only option. And I realize now that only option was the only way we could have done this show. So hindsight is a wonderful thing. And I think that's kind of a philosophy that I've sort of taken from this whole experience is sometimes when you're put in situations that you think, I wish something else had happened and this is all I have, sometimes that is the path. And it's just so clear that you almost think, well, this is too easy.
Right.
And anything above it, the like want of, oh, I wish HBO picked up our show, or I wish, you know, Netflix had wanted it. The reality is, like, that's ego.
Yeah.
All you want to do fundamentally is make a television show.
Right.
If your goal is to have a headline that HBO has bought your show, that's not focused. That is ego-driven narcissism, ultimately. And so it really, in the sort of honing in of that path, really led us to focus specifically on the task at hand and not be kind of dazzled by all the fun, frilly things that can kind of come along with opportunity.
And as you were creating it, did you have any expectations of where you wanted it to go, or was it just kind of an evolving thing?
We were on the TV Guide network, sir. We had no expectations to last the season.
Yeah.
In fact, there were times where we thought, is this network going to just cack out halfway through our show? Like, are people even, how do you find it?
Yeah.
And I had to do these like public service announcements that were basically to tell people how to find the network to watch our show. It was like, if you, on a Tuesday when the moon is high, you can go to this website and maybe if it works, you will get led to something else. And then if you type in a 9-digit code, you'll have access to another website that might lead you to our channel. It was the most insane. So we were thinking like, I mean, they're paying us to do this. Let's just make it as good as we possibly can. Right. Because that's the only way that people are going to watch it, is if one person sees it and loves it, maybe they'll tell their friends, yeah, you have to go through 9 websites and maybe on a Tuesday, on a leap year, and with the moon is high, you can find this channel. But it's worth it. Trust me, it's worth it.
Right.
So it really became a quest to like, it was closure at the end of the day, I think, really saying it out loud, because all we wanted to do was know that if it went away, whether our network, no one found the network, or whether, you know, we didn't get a second season, closure in knowing that you've done everything you possibly could to put that out there as purely and concisely and specifically as you possibly can, that's all you can really do. That's all we could do at the time.
Yeah. Because
the stakes were so low and yet so high. When you don't have a ton of money coming in, you really don't know what's next for you. So all you can do is do the best job you possibly can, because I would rather go to sleep at night at the end of that first season and say, well, it didn't work, but I'm proud of it. Mm-hmm. And nobody interfered and nobody made me compromise my vision. Yeah. That's something.
Absolutely.
And if it goes away, at least I have the experience of having
That's awesome.
made the show.
Yeah. Well, in that vein, I've heard you jokingly say that Schitt's Creek was a 5-year overnight success story. And I'm curious if along the way you had any challenges or setbacks in that first year or second year, or was it just kind of...
We were on the TV Guide Network.
But you got traction, though.
My
and you
middle
kept going.
name is Setbacks. It was... Nothing about it was easy, but then again... I don't think anything of great quality is easy.
Yeah.
And so I think the interesting thing about our situation was that we were working with very little money up in Canada with limited resources. We did not have budgets for the kinds of things that I thought I needed to make a show that could sit on a shelf with Veep or sit on a shelf with all the great sort of television that I had been watching. So what do?
Yeah.
Like when you don't have money for designer clothes, but your characters have come from $1 million lifestyles, well, you go on eBay for every single day of your life until you find the clothes you need, and then you bargain and you get them and you keep them in your own home, and then you pack them in a suitcase and cross the border and hope you don't get caught, and then you unpack it. And it was really, really scrappy, but there was no other choice.
Right.
And I was never going to be lazy about this opportunity. It was the biggest opportunity that had ever been presented to me. So I'm going to make it work despite all the odds because I don't have a choice. Yeah. So it really became this incredibly interesting and fulfilling process and journey of learning about production design. If I'm, I had no experience, but I'm sitting down with a production designer who's saying, okay, your story's set at a motel. What do you want that motel to look like? How do you want it to feel? And I was very specific in the sense that I did know. I knew that I wanted this to be a place that people could come to week after week and not feel grossed out. I didn't want it to feel jokey or cartoony. I didn't want there to be like peeling walls and rats running through. I wanted it to feel warm. I wanted it to feel oddly aspirational. So how do you do that? What does that mean? And so a lot of it, in my case, not having the words necessarily, the vocabulary to articulate it, meant that I had to deep dive into Pinterest boards, and I had to do a lot of research in terms of what is the quality of the motel that I was hoping to articulate. Let me show you in 50 different images. Probably could have used maybe 5. I showed up with 50. But better to be safe than sorry. And the same with our costumes. It's like, I would rather shop all year round, develop a horrible shopping addiction that I now have to this day, but have Catherine look the way she did on a shoestring budget, than be lazy. Yeah. So,
Right.
it in a way, it kind of forces you to have these experiences that you would never normally have by going above and beyond. And at the time you're thinking, gosh, I wish this was easier, or gosh, I wish I had more resources so that someone else could do this and take it off my plate. But now I know, going into the next show or movie that I make, exactly what I want.
Right. Yeah.
And it'll make me a better boss because I can go in and have a better vocabulary and a better sense of the parameters of a costume or what a character can be. And I think it's all kind of a learning experience. I just think in those moments when it gets so overwhelming, in this last season of our show, I was in a neck brace because the anxiety was so intense that my whole neck seized. And so I was sleeping in a neck brace at night, and then there was an acupuncturist, chiropractor that would come in the mornings and at lunch to make me able to move my neck, because I was also shooting, but I was also writing until 4 a.m. and then getting picked up at 5:30. So it became this thing where I'm thinking to myself, I'm very glad we're done. I'm glad this is the last season. I think my body was telling me, you made the right call. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I just think now, looking back, I would probably figure out how to tweak the wellness element of that, because my body quite literally shut down.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of wellness practitioners and providers in this
So
room,
great,
so I'm
so
sure
happy
that
to
we
be
could
here.
find somebody that would help you out.
Yeah. I could have used all of you a couple of years ago.
Absolutely.
So
Well,
many pictures of me just walking around with a neck brace on, just in a costume.
was that a good look or not?
No, it wasn't.
Not so much?
No.
Well, what you just described is this entrepreneurial process, and we have so many entrepreneurs in the room. And there's this one point where you take that jump when you want to start something, and then you've also described having to wear so many different hats. And what gave you the conviction that you could actually do that, or did you just go into it and say, "Hey, I'm going to figure it out"?
I think I've always been somebody that has followed through. I think part of it is just how I'm made, so I don't want to be I think it can be a dangerous thing to be like, just follow through. Because I think everyone's made differently, and for some people, in the same way that I am not necessarily the most socially forthcoming person, I don't love parties, I don't necessarily love being social. Some people that's very easy, and it's easy for them to say, well, just everyone's like, a fun stranger that you haven't met yet. And it's like, well, you don't quite understand where my head's at.
Right.
That's a nightmare. It's hard to say just follow through, but what I will say is I think I've always been somebody that has not had that trepidation. And there are friends and family members of mine who are incredibly trepidatious about taking those kinds of leaps or following through with an idea because the fear is failure.
Right.
Whereas for me, it just came from, if I have this idea, why not see how far I could possibly take it? What's the worst that could happen? And I think in that process, you realize that not a lot of people do have follow through. So if you are that person that executes, that takes the idea and finishes it and actually has something to show for it, you are inherently way ahead of most people. I just don't think a lot of people think about it that way.
Right.
It's like a lottery. It's kind of one of those things where you're like, I'm buying a lottery ticket, except the reality is most people haven't bought that ticket, so your chance of winning is a lot higher.
Right.
You just think that you've overthought the whole process, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it was the same thing with my glasses. I started a glasses company selling eyewear like 10 years ago when I left my job at MTV because I thought, well, I don't know what I'm doing next. And I think when you do something, when you're on television, you've had like relative success. In my case, it was kind of like up in Canada, working with the Hills. So I'm not Meryl Streep at that point. And I think the greatest thing that I allowed myself was to separate my ego from my future. And I think as a 20-something who up in Canada, people knew who I was and people really enjoyed my show, to walk away from that was a big thing. But to walk away from the expectation of like, will I do something on television again? Is that something that's going to make me happy? It's something that I think will satiate my ego, because people who come up to me now and ask what I'm doing next, if I don't have anything to tell them, what does that mean? What are they going to think?
Right.
The choice to say, I don't give a fuck about what they think. I'm going to do what makes me happy. And part of that is going to start a glasses company that has nothing to do with being a television personality. It's a passion project that I want to pursue alongside whatever I'm doing. And in the process, I cold called people. I figured out what I needed to do to like get the glasses manufacturing done. And slowly but surely, I built the company literally by myself. And for the first 5 years of this company, it was just me. I was running the website. I sourced the graphic designers. I was doing all of this stuff, all because I found it important to continue to pursue ideas. It didn't matter necessarily what they were. It was like, I think there's some value. I think I have something to say in this arena. I'm going to take it as far as I can. And eventually it got to a point where Schitt's Creek started, and I never want to do anything half-assed, so I put the glasses on hold, never did anything with it, started Schitt's Creek, had some success with Schitt's Creek, and then, ironically, the more success I had with Schitt's Creek, the more glasses I noticed were selling on this website that still said like March 2012 on it. Like it was a horrible, it was so embarrassing, but I thought, well, there's interest now. People are finding it some way, somehow. And then in the process, once I left Schitt's Creek, I went back to the glasses company, and now we're bigger than ever before. We're still very small,
Fantastic.
but my team is now 3 people, and that's better than 1. You don't need to have me answer your customer service questions.
You're not
I'm
packing and
not
shipping.
that nice when it comes to customer service, turns out. You have a stupid question, I'm not going to be very nice in the responses. But again, it was about pursuing an idea, and now here I am. And I never thought when I walked away from the company, a few years ago, it was out of respect for the company, because I would never want to sell something to somebody that I wasn't directly responsible for. And also I knew that I had to put my focus elsewhere, but it all comes back around in a weird sort of way. So I was glad to have done it, because now I have a wonderful team, and I'm doing something aside from my kind of main career path that is bringing me an alternative sense of joy and accomplishment and fulfillment. So yeah, I think the idea of follow through is so crucial. It's just about, if you don't have it, if you're not someone that like inherently has that sense of follow through, then there's no harm in pulling someone into the room with you and saying, hey, you seem really aggressive and strong in that area. I have this idea. Do you want to work on it with me? Make sure they're good and not family necessarily. Make sure that the person is not going to scam you. But I think this idea that we have to do it by ourselves can sometimes really intimidate people. But teamwork, putting a team together to execute whatever the idea is, doing whatever it takes doesn't mean that you are any less responsible for it.
Right. Well, and the team
but get
angle,
it done.
Yeah, and the team angle, obviously, is, as people that build businesses, hiring the right team is absolutely critical, and you certainly did that on Schitt's Creek. You want to tell us a little bit about the casting process and how you made your decisions?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was beyond it was like my dad and I were responsible for 140 people coming to work every day. And the one thing that I will say is, I had one too many experiences in my life working for people where I was made to feel undervalued, disrespected, like my time wasn't necessarily that worthy of note. And there's nothing more demoralizing than that feeling, than doing your best, knowing that you're putting in all this work and not having people say that you
appreciate it.
I see what you're doing and I really like it. Thank you. You're a valuable part of the team. So coming onto this show, I think I took a lot of the lessons that I had in my previous sort of places of employment and said, well, these are the things I'm definitely not going to do. And it was very fortunate that I think my dad and I, professionally speaking, have the same values, which is, if we're not inspiring people, and if people aren't inspired when they come to work, if this isn't going to be an experience that people love, then what are we doing? You don't want to work with people who are feeling forced into a situation, and you don't want to force people into a situation.
Right.
You want to create an environment where everyone, from the person who's preparing the food every day to the person who's holding the boom mic to the actor, is feeling equally as valued in the place, because if you were to pull away any of those jobs, it'll all fall apart.
Yep.
If you don't have food for the actors, they get grouchy. That's a nightmare. Trust me. If you don't have a boom operator, you can't hear the voices, you can't get the performances on camera if you don't have people to shoot it. So it all becomes this interrelated community of valuable people who are making something together. And that became sort of the main philosophy for us, was just, if there was ever any tension in the workplace, if there was any discrepancies, if there were any altercations, it all had to come down to, what can we do to remedy this so that everyone here is feeling good? Because everyone is valued. And at the time, I started to send monthly, when we first started, and all the way through 6 seasons, I would send monthly emails to each department, just talking to them about what I loved about the work that they had done each month. And the responses that I had gotten from people were like, I mean, it's kind of sad. I was sad for them. Like, they were like, you know that we've never had this kind of positive feedback before. And I'm thinking, sir, you're 65 years old. You've been working in this industry for 50 years. What are you talking about?
Right.
And the reality is, so many people don't care about anybody but themselves in the workplace. And how can you run a business like that? How can you expect to have longevity? How can you expect joy to come through the work that you're making if you're not actively seeing people and acknowledging people? And it's not a hierarchical structure in any capacity. Even in, I'm speaking on the entertainment industry, which I think rests its hat a lot on a hierarchical structure. There's a lot of people who think they're really great in this industry, but they are no better than the interns who are working in the mailroom down below. So that's how that was it. You have to have fun.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you also have a lot of humility with that, which is great. I think that also drives building a good corporate culture.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's humility. I think for me, it's common sense.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want people
so common,
angry showing up to, I guess it's not so common. But yeah, it's, and we had an incredible team of people, and it was so wonderful to get to come to work and understand that everyone felt a part of it. And when our show had the success that it had last year at the Emmys and all of that, I mean, it was a shame that we weren't all able to be there together.
Right.
But I think the most profound takeaway from that whole experience for me was the emails that I got from my team saying, I'm so proud of us.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They never felt removed from the success of the show. And that is, if I take anything away from what we had done, that sense of community pride is profound.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about working with your dad and your sister. We also have a lot of family businesses in here, people that work with spouses or partners or brothers and sisters, and sounds like you've had a positive experience, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. We know how it started.
I know. Well, I wonder if we can all relate to this. Listen, it's great. No, it is. It was one of the, I think listen, my sister and I are very close, and I was able to, write her a wonderful part of the show, and she just crushed it week after week, and it was so exciting to see her thrive.
Yeah.
My dad and I obviously had a different kind of thing in the sense that we were managing people. We had to figure out a way. I think it was mainly that first year where we really had to actively separate our familial instincts from our professional instincts. Mm-hmm. And, I think the way that we talk to our family members around a dinner table is very different than we would talk to like coworkers or anyone in a professional setting.
Right.
So I think for my dad and I, it was like anytime we sensed like this could go into like family dynamic bickering,
right.
We are in front of all of these people who are looking to us for guidance. Like, we have to show up and be as professional as we possibly can with each other to make sure that everyone around us doesn't feel like, ooh, are they going to get in a fight?
Right,
is the show going to be over? Like,
right.
What is that about? So yeah, I think the first year was really finding our footing, not only just in terms of just general, how do you separate how we talk to each other, because you become so habitualized in terms of how you talk to one another as family members, but also what are our roles? Let's delineate like what you're going to do versus what I can do, so that we don't end up like doing that and
right.
getting complicated and messy. No one needs mess in the workplace. So it was great. It was, it took a minute, but once we found our footing, as I'm sure so many of you who are working with family members can attest to, like, it takes a sec. It takes a minute.
And how did you decide what role each of you were going to play in between? Not
it was
the actual
mainly just
but
me saying, I got this.
You got this?
Yeah.
Let me run with it.
Yeah, which was an amazing sort of leap of faith that I think my dad took, because up until that point, I had never written a television show before. I had never had any experience in scripted television, and I was show running a television show that he was in,
Right.
but also one of his dear friends who he's worked with, Catherine O'Hara, for 40 years, is also in it.
Right.
We can't fuck this up. So I am so like grateful for the faith, at first blind faith, that he put in me when I said, please trust me when I tell you that I have this. And he said, okay. And that's
fantastic.
a wonderful gift that he gave me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And did any dynamics with your sister change, or was it just...
We don't speak. She got really into herself. No, I'm kidding. No, nothing changed. I mean, it was, in a way, it was like a wonderful thing, because how we have 6 years of our lives like immortalized on film.
Yeah.
That's such a cool
And you're winning
thing that
together,
you can
too.
do, like that you can share with your family, to be able to say, this is a chapter of our lives that are out there for people to see, and for us to go back and see. And you can mark the growth. You can mark the kind of professional growth. You can mark the physical growth. You can,
Right.
you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to show up every day and be with your family and cheer them on, and then to get to share this kind of success with them has been a wonderful thing.
You mentioned last year's award season. So as your show is becoming iconic out there, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And what was that like for you and for the cast to see that?
Foggy.
Yeah.
Literally, I was like, mask on, glasses fogged. I couldn't see anyone. I was like screaming, and like I've seen footage of that night, and I'm like looking in the opposite direction, but my glasses were fogged. It was great in a way to be back home in Toronto. Granted, it was in a tent, and there were people in hazmat suits handing us awards. The whole thing felt oddly apocalyptic and like almost a joke. It was wonderful, though. It was wonderful to be home, to be in Canada, representing Canada, representing a team of people who worked really hard to get this show where it was. So in a way, there was like a large sense of kind of pride. You know, you would love to have been with everybody. I would love to have taken my team to the Emmys and like had that whole experience. But again, that's ego shit that, you know, at the end of the day is not as significant as what we experience. So it was what it was. I think it was a very Canadian Schitt's Creek way of like, you have this groundbreaking Emmy accomplishment in a tent in a backyard in Toronto. Like, it's never going to, we never had a glamorous route through any of this.
No red
so
carpet.
it tracks. Like, all of this tracks with our show. It's like, you're doing great, but not that great. So, you know, just let something's guiding us, and I'm, you know, we're just here for the ride.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things I really enjoyed hearing about is how when you were conceiving the show, you really wanted to depict sexuality and LGBTQ community differently than it had been done in the past. And so I'd like to just hear a little bit about some of your thought process as you went into that, and then maybe some scenes that you think represent that.
Well, I mean, I think as a gay person who has been trying to be an actor, it's astonishing how bleak the landscape is when it comes to rich, meaningful, textured roles that are being written with purpose. And the purpose part is key, because the number of parts scripts that I read that's like, does this person have a life? Does he have a family? Does he have a partner? Or is he just here for the wisecracks in the office? That to me is like, we gotta do better. And so when I had the opportunity to tell a story, you know, rooted in my own experience, I just knew that it couldn't be derivative, but I also didn't want it to be too heavy-handed, because I think all we get is either derivative or heavy-handed. the normalization of everybody's stories. The more we tell the stories, the more people will want to write them and watch them and celebrate them. And it doesn't all, like, you know, it's like if you're not the wisecracking friend in the office being like, girl, you sure about that? Like, which is a line I've had to say in an audition. Or you're the person that's like, I found the love of my life. Oh, what? They were killed? Like, it is so, there's nothing in between. So it was so crucial to sit down and say, what is this story? How am I going to make sure that we give it the same weight and value and nonchalance as we would any of the straight stories being told on television? And a lot of that for me was about not caring about what people think, because at the end of the day, it's my fucking show. Like, and we were fortunate enough to not have interference. I mean, going back to just how things happened, Pop was so supportive of everything we were doing. CBC up in Canada was so supportive of everything we're doing. I know for a fact that if we were to have pitched some of the stories that we explored on our show on a network American platform, right, we would have gotten that slash through pages. And so in a way, I'm so grateful, because the stories we told ended up, particularly about my character and the love story that we ended up telling, became so sort of definitive of what our show stood for, which was inclusion and possibility and love and open-mindedness and support and encouragement, and the fact that if you're there for each other and if no one asks questions about why people are the way they are, you're going to build a community that just sees people happy. And that's ultimately all we want for people. So I knew that I wanted my characters to be physically intimate, as much as I'd seen Ross and Rachel kiss when he came home from work or she came home from work. You realize, as a gay person, like, we don't see that often. We don't see the casual intimacy, because that's what a network will be like, do we need to see them kissing? Isn't a hug enough? And you're thinking, okay, but that runs deep for people who don't get to see themselves represented in that capacity. So yeah, we kissed as many times as I could possibly write in, because that's how life works and that's how people are. And what I didn't know at the time was how that story would affect people and how powerful the medium of television actually was. I think all I wanted to do was tell stories that represented my experience in a way that felt truthful and grounded and honored my life and the lives of my friends, and tried to make it realistic, and tried, when it came to everything, a coming out scene, exploring, you know, the idea of monogamy, to, you know, a first kiss, to any of those things. Those are the moments that I had to really sit with and say, I'm handling very sensitive subject matter, and in most cases this would just be kind of like, and then this happens and you write it off. But the reality is, these are things that are so intimate and personal and precious to people. If you don't honor those carefully, you're going to lose people. So part of that experience was really, and it took a lot of time, and I ran the stories past a lot of friends to say, does this feel right? Do we feel like we're getting this? What is it about this that doesn't, you know, I think for anyone who's watched my show, I think the prime example was kind of the first season, or the season 3, I kissed my boyfriend for the first time, who realized that he was a gay person. And it was originally scripted that he kissed me. And something about the scene never felt right, and it wasn't clicking for me, and I talked to friends about it, and I realized in the end that the reality is, thinking back to my own experience as a closeted gay person, I would never have had the strength of will to do that. I would have wanted it. I would have felt it, which is what this character of Patrick was doing the whole season. He was trying to get my attention. Right. But then when it came down to it, it's such foreign territory that I had to be the one to do it. And the minute I realized okay, we got to switch who's making the move here, it all kind of clicked into place and felt far more real. And so that kind of attention to detail was so crucial, because that, I think, is what affected people. That's what members of the community were watching and saying, okay, I understand that, I feel that, it feels like someone took the time. And then people who were outside of the community, who were maybe seeing stories like this for the first time, were getting an incredibly authentic, real depiction of what a relationship could be. So the response, the feedback has been really kind of overwhelming, because all I was trying to do was honor the experience, when in actuality, you realize that television is reaching people, and that when you sit down in front of your television screen, you are your most vulnerable. You are in your home, likely. There's no judgment. We're not putting on the armor that we do to just like leave the house and like get through the day. You are really exposed. And I think when you're sitting and you're being confronted by two people who fall in love with each other in a really special, funny, lovely way, it can't help but stir something inside even the deepest skeptics. And so to read these letters of families who have changed their ideology and have embraced their gay kids, or have understood their coworkers in different ways, that was the unexpected plus side to all the hard work of just authenticating that experience, was realizing like, oh my gosh, I had no idea how powerful the medium of television actually could be when you couple it with something positive. And then also at the same time, you realize how powerful the medium of television can be when it's destructive as well. So,
right. Absolutely.
That was a long answer to your question.
No, but I appreciate it. I think everybody enjoyed that. Thank you. All right.